Hey, what's up, viewer? Welcome back to this Nebulous live creation series. This is Day6, Hour6, and I'm continuing the work to develop the infrastructure UI and soon to be the research system UI. The research system is something the game is going to need one or the other, and it's a little easier to implement it. It just comes down to exposing a couple strategic scaling values for balance, which isn't so bad. And I was jumping in here to test whether or not I had fixed something, which I think was the idea that I was trying to raise the frequency up to like at least 10 or 11 so I could test whether or not the color is set properly now. So how about something like this? And if I run the scan at 11, some range, is the scan white or does it change to black? Okay, so it just goes to white. So it's a very high frequency white scan. And the idea would be that it will I suppose the idea would be that it would go a lot faster than a scan of 8. Which is also white, but much slower, technically speaking. And as I bump this up, bump up the frequency, it continues to scale. And I'm just jacking up the economy nerve for now. But it looks like the colors are proper. And this just allows the player to have an even faster scan. So if I wanted to drop this down to a high range red scan, I can still do that. Bump the range a little bit. Give it another run. Because I know there is a higher frequency. There, and there it is, the third one. Alright, so that's sort of how this is supposed to work. And if I change to this, it should actually turn off that ring. So that's a bug. Let me see here. If I click the sun, it also stays on. This is referring to current active selection is not a thing. So I might need to change that. And essentially, we'll need to fix this little bug here where if I'm scanning with something like this, and I select a different celestial, it needs to turn off the scan ring. Same thing if the sun is selected. So it's working properly if I turn off. It's working properly if I deselect no other object. But if I deselect with some other object without scanning capacity, it does not default it. So I need to tweak that. So I'm trying to consider where that occurs. Here's another null exception. That's the same one, probably. Alright, so Let me consider this a little bit further. This is essentially in the raycast code. At some point in the raycast code, it is incorrectly. So let's also go here and I'll make it to null. That might fix that bug, whatever this is. The other bug is going to be player chooses new active selection, or player clicks selection button. And if the raycast hits something that is selectable, it needs to be selected. But it needs to move the ring to the new object, more or less. Or it doesn't have to move the ring, but it needs to at least turn off the ring. So we're looking at player click selection button. And we are considering the event of current active selection becomes this game object no matter what. It may not have any of these components. And this one's working correctly. Oh wait, no, this isn't correct. Oh no, this is correct. So if there's a selection that's clicking into space, then the player data will or essentially what the player data is doing here is it is properly changing the ring active setting. So here it's updating the radius of the scanning radius object. So that should be done up here at some point in the event the object does not have a scanning range. So if the current active selection has scanning range, then the ring actually should move to this object, but if it does not have scanning range, then we want to update the scanning radius to 0, and that will remove the scanning ring from an object that shouldn't have one. And we've got to, in the event there is a scanning infrastructure, we have got to take the player data.active scanning radius object. You have to set its position to basically the player data.current active selection.game object.transform.position, and simply move the ring onto the object. And while we're here, we probably can basically make sure that the radius gets set to 0. Just in case it's coming off of an object that has a much larger radius. And this should actually fix the little bug I'm referring to. And we've got the ability to select this planet. Might as well start investing in the econ. I am going to need a higher range. Let's try to tweak it up to like 10. And the frequency is fine, so let's max it up here and max this. Keep the frequency down to 1. And with the econ, we can run our first scan. And if I can reach a different planet in this range, I can click it, and if I click it, it should, in fact, deactivate the ring. Okay, it does. If I go back to this one, it actually held the settings, so I could come in here and turn this, and it would... Uh-oh. So I have to change the radius for that to work. Once again, we're getting this null reference exception here. Current active selection does not have an econ infrastructure. So we're almost looking at just guarding these, as gross as that sounds. So we're almost looking at just saying if player data, I'm just make sure I'm not in play mode here. Okay. The other stuff looked like it was working properly. So if the player data dot current active selection dot get component economy infrastructure, then we can do these things relevant to the economy's infrastructure. Now I'll fix that null issue. We can more or less do the same thing here. So if the player data dot current active selection component scanning range infrastructure, if it has that component, then we must do this. If it does not have the component, there's actually an option to add a button that will, or it will activate a button that will essentially take a base economy value and require that amount to install the infrastructure base value. And then like once that value is complete, then the investments can begin, is one option. And that slows down the growth of on new planets because you have to run through that base value first. However, it will be a little more complicated to implement like that. However, it's not going to give me those null issues if I just do it like this. The only other option is to, well, there's got to be, essentially that is how you actually add the component to the object. But to add that component, you have to claim the object, essentially. You have to have a ship that has claimed, essentially a ship that's claimed it. Oops, we didn't mess anything up there. And let's yank this out here. Make sure I change this to frequency. And this is very simply going to remove that null error. Sorry, I'm kind of lost in thought here. I'm just making sure that this is gonna null guard everything, and then what was the other thing we were trying to fix? Let's see if this will actually do what we want. It should fix the error showing up, but I thought there was another concern. I feel like I'm forgetting whatever the other concern was. Alright, so if I select this, invest in the econ, increase the radius, increase the arc, and run a scan at 1 degree, and then I click the sun, it should turn that off, it does. If I click this again, I can set the ring back up. But what was the other issue? I think for sure 10's got it. Bump the frequency up because that increases the speed of the scan. And we will discover a couple planets here. So the problem is that if I select this, it doesn't deactivate the scan element. And it didn't even move the active selection properly either. So the plan was, this was supposed to, if I click on this, this is supposed to move the ring. Well, it's not going to move the ring, but I guess I'm just going to have to deactivate the ring. Or deactivate the UI, more specifically. In the event that I select a different element. So in that particular instance, I was just turning off its radius, but I also need to grab the I've got to grab the active scanning elements, or whatever they were called, and turn off its, or set enable to false. Active scanning elements, okay. So in here we are going to once this is done, messing with the script assemblies. We'll manage to get into the script, and it was called active scanning elements, right? Active scanning elements. So we've got a visual element for the active scanning elements, and that query is active scanning elements. And we want to take active scanning elements, set enabled to false, and take active scanning elements, their style, opacity, and set it to 0.65. And that is going to provide us with a deactivated visual scanning element in the event the selection does not have scanning capacity. Or more specifically, scan range. So if it doesn't have any scanning range infrastructure, it will turn off. Which means it probably doesn't have any scanning frequency infrastructure either, so it will also it'll basically be matched in those instances. We'll see though if I need to add it in here as well at some point. Alright, so now that that's added, the scanner should deactivate properly. Sorry about this compiling time. Alright, so let's take a look again. And we're going to see, we should see the panel deactivate properly if there's no scanning capacity on the selection. And effectively, we'll grab this, invest, speed up the econ, set this range to max, max its range here, and we need to give it like 3 range to discover local planets. So something like this. And that's actually plenty, so let's give it 8 and give it a shot. See if it catches anything right on the edge. And if, okay, so the goal is that selecting this will turn off the scanner and turn off the scanning UI. Okay, good. And then deactivating this means it's okay. So going back here, it thinks it's okay, and then if I go back to the main planet, everything is still fine. So that is essentially functional now at this point. All right, so now it's kind of looking like we're almost at ships, because ships are required to fly to this planet to claim it, and then once it's claimed, then these are investable. Maybe in a way where they have to take an initial value. So like maybe it would cost like 500 to give this thing scanning range. And the same to all of these basically, like maybe they cost like 500. And then when you click them, you spend that 500 if you can afford it, and you then get this look where you can increase the economy by investing in it. But you also gain the component on the planet, so then it just plugs into the checks. And it doesn't matter how many you have, they all just plug into the same deficit value system. The main issue comes down to the queue having like thousands of them. If it starts getting into that point, it will be like there'll have to be a different system. And the system will have to I'm not sure exactly what, but it will have to like be outside of the tick system and just, but it's basically ticks with tick system. It might be a separate tick system, completely separate one. And you can slow down that system and see what happens. I'm actually not sure. I'm not sure which one to do. At this point, however, we really want to be able to make a ship for claiming this other planet in the system, basically. And then you just keep it real simple, and if it's claimed, it gets these components. And we just use this base UI. We don't have to make the other UI for the raw investment, but it makes some sense where it acts as an economy sink to some degree to expand. So I'll have to consider that, but I think we can get away with it by using these. And I mean, to set that up, I'm basically going to need chips. I'm not really sure how to get around that fact. And so to build ships, we need orbital build capacity. Or I could create an orbital build capacity that helps create ships. And it more or less builds a ship, or it contributes to building a ship. Not even sure how far I can zoom out here, but yeah, now I'm just messing around a little bit. Can't deny it. Can't deny it. And that's pretty expensive, 30,000 economy. And there's something out there, but there is this one issue where the economy, like, there's no reason not to just power up the economy on auto, basically, without some kind of diminishment. So having a pre-investment value makes some sense for that regard. This next scan's up to 154 range, dang. Way too big though on this with this economy. So this other ring will fall behind eventually. Alright, so I just have to decide on which route to take now, because there's like a bunch of different things I need to do. I have to make some ship prefabs, and I have to... I can also do the research system. And just power out that thing. Get it to a point like this where it's expandable. And as the player gains values, it like will really start to bump its value. or it will really start to make sense how the research system affects the game. Otherwise, it's a lot of graphic stuff. Like making these planets look better. Adding more diversity in the system to scan down makes sense, and then at some point there's going to have to be something for scanning to a different star, which will be very important. So somehow the player can reach a different star system. That does require a ship of a certain type. And then the priorities can get selected through this. Still makes sense. Automation for the player. And investment in dealing with neighbors. More or less. And the only thing lacking from that would be the ship engineering window. Which could get really intricate. The player would essentially be able to look at their ship. Another thing is, once the player can take control of the ship, it can have a scanning capacity. So it would need to, or it can have the capacity to warp right next to a signature and do a high frequency scan at a very low angle and range. So something to consider. Especially if the player has their own ship, capital ship, and they're buffing the scan using the mechanics. So the player could be integral in scanning stuff down also, if that's the route they choose to go down. Alright, so I suppose doing some work on the research system. This is basically where I'm at. And it will essentially kind of show where I'm going with the research system. Because the infrastructure is more like direct buffs. Research is indirect buffs. They can buff every stat, but they do it globally by costing more, basically. So it's like I'm not quite sure how to balance it exactly correct. I'm thinking like 1,000 points for 1% or something. Maybe even 100 points per percent. However, at 1,000 points per percent to get 100% bonus purely through research is like what? 100,000? Or even 1,000,000? A million economy, basically. To effectively double anything purely through tech. So then the idea would be that that would be an AoE, or the idea is that that would be global. As it's researched, more or less. It might maybe require a retrofit, but the idea is that it would be global. You could also require maybe just like 500. Or, 250. To achieve 100%. but it does give the player the ability to further augment whatever build strategy they so desire up to this point. The only limiter would come down to how I do the random spawning for resources, because I can hamper certain strategies. So it's definitely something I have to decide in that regard. But I think I can set it up where I can start using the research system. So I'm just going to have to dive into the UI builder and get to it. So I'm going to open this up, and if you have to tweak the background settings on this. And I think the rule was to go white and black, I think. And let me double check this label. It says it's just a part of the visual element of the active selection information, so this should be active research information. Okay, and it's basically the label. So I'm going to double check these. So this label is 18 pixel bold, and this one needs to match it and be centered. Now we have to consider a few other things. The research element only has the label element. So it's open for the next element. So the next element is more or less easy enough. It is just research values. And this one will be label parent. Okay, so this is sized properly, but we need a research values to stretch across the entire rest of the size. So let me see real quick how this is set up. This is using, it just uses a flex grow of 1. Okay. So more or less, it's the same thing here. We're doing a flex grow of 1, and that will give us an element that is in fact the size of the entire space that we have been given. So the next thing we have to do is come up with what I've decided to be about 3 to start with research tiers, which is essentially ships, economy, and like research, basically. And I've had trouble with all these being on grow, so I'm going to test if I can share these properly. If this doesn't work, I'm going to I guess they are the same size. So we'll call this ship research values. Oh, ship research values element, more specifically. And this one was, I guess for now we'll just call it economy research values element. And this one is like so all the ship stats can get buffed in tech. Like all of the infrastructure values that can essentially get buffed in tech. So maybe instead of economy, it's infrastructure. Real quick. So then this will be Because the ships and infrastructure make sense. The third one has to do with, like, increasing your... like, parallel processing stuff. Like, it has to do with increasing the ability to invest in multiple things at once. So it's almost like investment. Investment research. I'll leave it at this for now. We need to toss labels into each of these. Investment research values labels. Okay. Yeah.
Is there a dog downstairs?
No.
Have the dogs been downstairs?
Nope.
Is Sue been here?
No. Sorry, it's my mom yelling at me. Alright, where was I? Okay, so in these labels I was saying... Okay, so we're simply going to change these to match in the text value. So in this instance it's... maybe ship values. And down here we'll call it infrastructure values. And we might change it to infrastructure research. This one's investment values. So that's how you would increase how fast you do research. Or it basically increases how much tech, or it increases how much of the economy you can pump into the research system, is more accurate. And it's the same thing for the infrastructure system. Increasing investment research values will increase how much economy you can pump into the infrastructure system at once. So it's a way that you use research to increase your build capacity. And the research values, or the infrastructure values, are used to bump the raw values of the actual infrastructure. So you need to make sure that by doing a system like this, that I don't have like arbitrary... Actually looks like these sizes are off. So I'm going to really quickly change these to 0.33 on all three of them, and that has a way of normalizing them, I think. Okay, I think that's a little better. So now we're looking at, what was I saying? So now I just need to make sure that if I put 10 points into bumping something in infrastructure, that I can't get the exact same result by just bumping 10 points in research. Or in an investment research. So like, they can't yield the same results in different categories. That's just redundancy. So whatever I put in here, I need to make sure is pretty straightforward. However, for this, it was like, the idea was to have every single ship value you could imagine go in here. So like, weapon damage, weapon range, weapon tracking speed, weapon rate of fire, shield amount, shield regeneration, capacitor amount, capacitor regeneration, thrust, subspace thrust, and then like warp speed, and then like warp spool time, or like warp engagement time, and then like technically the ships also have scanners, so there could be scanner buffs here, and then there's even more. Like it could get even more dense than that for stuff the ships can do. So that's where it's almost. I'm almost envisioning like 4 or 5 research categories, because a lot of this stuff could get bumped through the research system. I guess I could try the labels with a black background but white words. Still pretty small, even at the, oh, it's not bumped. So I do the 18 bold thing. It's a little better. I like the centering thing like that. I guess it's more or less doable. I'll just run it through all of them. And it's a temporary separator because the system is not completely designed yet. The research system is not completely designed. But now we have these. There's also the potential I could just put a scroll box in here, and there can scroll up and down between values. That's a potential option. I've also got the colors backwards. Or I guess not technically, I just have to change the background, perhaps. Okay, so this is kind of leaning me to make this larger. Same thing goes for this. Probably I could squeak this one also. And I stand out just a little bit, or this stand out just a little bit more, excuse me. My throat's getting a little sore from talking today. The research values are more or less just like these. There is a name and then like a value, but the value is actually like a percentage that is 0.000, and it goes up. Each investment puts it up 0.001% is the idea. And that increase is possibly bumped by the investment values, because if there's parallel research value, then you can bump that up to like 2 or 3 points per run at it, if you've invested in research capacity. So I essentially need to grab this element, take a look here, and this text box needs to mesh with a new element, which is accidentally expanding the whole thing. So it's growing, but then it's like so I just have this to grow. still incorrect. It's not supposed to be stretching its neighbors like that. Leave it at 0.33. Oh, that's the element anyway. So let me just set this to 0.33 again. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's doing that. So let me grab the actual whole research values, and try changing the alignment property. And that didn't do anything. So now I'm looking at like setting grow to 0 and like manually setting the sizes to a percentage, 33%. Oh, this one I don't want. This one I want to grow properly. But the internal values element needs to be 33%. And that's pretty cool how it's doing them correctly. Okay, so now it's just going to have... Okay, so this one's correct. This one's correct. And this one's not correct. Oh, this grow needs to be set to 0. And then double check this one is set to 0. Okay, so they're all 33%. There's just a little bit of extra space at the bottom, it looks like. Or like, let's see, I'm going to set this to 34%. Okay, so it fills in. So I set to 33%. There's like just enough room for a margin between these. So I could feasibly grab the parent element, or this element down here, and do the space between thing. And that should actually spread out them out for a different background color. Not sure if it'll be enough, but let's see. What was it? What was it? Black? Dang, so that's just black. Leave it like this for now then. And now we've got these elements, which I guess these are transparent now. But more or less, we need to come in here and start adding values that are akin to these over here. Alright, so let's see here. This visual element. Oh, and then this visual element is supposed to go into its container all the way. And this is the ship research values buttons, basically. So then we're going to need an element. I don't have a size for it yet, but the element will I'm going to scooch down just a little bit just to see the names better. So the visual element will basically be a specific option. So it's like ship research. Oh, okay, so this is something I've got to learn how to do. Instead of saying ship research values buttons and then typing in as this visual element ship research weapon attack values element or something. The idea is that I can tree down from something else. So it's like research values / values elements or / ship research / buttons and then pick one or something. I think there's ways to do that. So if I open this up, I jump in here, Unity 3D, C#. I'm trying to remember. So it's visual elements, or UI toolkit, UI elements. Traverse root visual element. Something like this. So I'm pointing to basically the documentation for visual tree. Because there's the uQuery section here. Okay, so I can just query its children, or I can query for its children. Alright, so that's simply suggesting that I should... That's suggesting that I can query for child element. I can query for child elements. So I'm actually going to give this a new shot here. There's probably a more intelligent way to build these UIs, which is by... Or I can simplify this naming process by ripping out the ship research values on all of its children by simply filtering the string by children hierarchy. So I can name them more simply and then do child queries to actually get down to an element that has much more simpler naming convention. So to do that, I'm going to wind up reconfiguring how I name these. I might just redo them, but the idea is to use the fact that they're in a hierarchy to filter themselves and not have to filter them by name. And I think that should make this particular part of binding to these elements a little bit easier. Alright, so that's what I'm going to be handling in the next hour. The research system, once I set it up correctly, it'll be very easily expandable, and I can plug into the deficit system pretty simply like these do, and they have an effect on what what kind of builds the player will be able to take into the game space. And it should be pretty easy to set up and get flowing. So I figured I would get that done before I jumped into ships, since they can be since they're going to be a little bit more on the model intensive side of things. So that's what I'm going to be handling in the next video. I appreciate it if you've watched it up to this point, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.